So this is the second week of the series, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. We're going through a book by this man, Peter Scazzero, the same title, and we have two one groups that are discussing this book every week. You can still sign up at the Info Center if you'd like to kind of dive deeper and discuss the book. We think about the tragedy last night. Obviously, I'll speak for myself. The anti-gay hatred that we experience in our world, speaking for me, is often motivated by religious belief. And some people might think that's just a Captain Obvious statement, but I'll just say that. I'll speak for me. And regardless of what motivated that attack last night, as a pastor, I am very aware that much of the opposition to the gay rights movement comes from the church community, and that if you're a church that says, you know what, we're going to love people and just accept people, and we're all going to have a good time together and create community, that makes you abnormal in the United States right now. And it won't be that way forever. These kinds of societal changes take time. It won't be that way forever, but it takes too long, of course. And I just wanted to say that news last night makes me appreciate all of you even more. And I told somebody last week, I've served in a few churches now, and boy, I hope none of those folks watch this, what I'm about to say. For the first time, I have the feeling on Sunday mornings when I walk in that I'm just proud of everybody here. I'm not like embarrassed of the people and the mentalities in the church. I don't have to say, well, I don't agree with this whole section of people that I think are doing this or whatever. I'm just proud of all of you and the kind of community that you're creating here, making One Church what it is. It's something special. It is growing in the United States, but there aren't a lot of us. And it really is a cool, meaningful, beautiful thing that all of you are creating in this church. And I know we're all humble, modest people, and we don't like to be self-congratulatory, but could you give yourselves a hand for that? Because it really is important. And you're creating the kind of community here whose beauty shows even more the ugliness of what happened last night. And so I really want to thank you for being a part of this community. And for a long time, because I grew up in fundamentalist religion, for a long time, I have believed that fundamentalist religion is really rooted in personal emotional issues. And I've talked about that several times. I think folks are drawn to fundamentalist religion out of a need they feel in their own lives. And maybe it's fear, maybe it's self-hatred, it's not being able to deal with the stuff in their own life and be real about that and acknowledge that, so they are compelled to pretend and are drawn to religious systems that help create environments where they can pretend. And they can kind of split, and they split the whole world into an us and them, which makes me totally cool. Like, fundamentalist religion never works out like, okay, our little group is wrong and everybody else is right. It never works out like that. You know what I mean? It's always the other way around, like, oh, our little group is right and everybody else is wrong. I think that's rooted in like personal stuff. And so an emotionally healthy spirituality sounds really good when we're dealing with what we are in this world. And so last week, Pastor Aaron summarized the first 3 chapters of the book. He defined emotional health and spirituality. He showed us 10 signs of an unhealthy spirituality. Most of us probably checked all 10. And he told us about an assessment that you can take online here at this Emotionally Healthy Spirituality website. I took that test. Being called an emotional adolescent wasn't the highlight of my week, I'll be honest with you. But, if you're into that kind of thing, you can take the assessment to see how healthy you are emotionally, but I'm working on it, okay? And so today, I'm talking about chapter 4 in the book, and it's Know Yourself That You May Know God, Becoming Your Authentic Self. Now, if we could pick people out of the congregation who are most qualified to give this sermon, I would probably be like that guy who's left last saying, pick me, pick me. Like, I don't feel incredibly qualified to give a sermon on emotional authenticity, because most of my life I felt like I've struggled to be in touch with my emotions, to always know what I'm feeling and why. Some of that has to do with my background that I've shared before. I came from an abusive environment as a child. It's been a long road, and I've gone through years of my life not sure who I was, not sure how I felt at any given moment and why. And so maybe I'm not so qualified. At the same time, maybe spending a long time trying, talking to counselors and working on these issues, it's helped me to be aware at least. And so maybe I do have some things to share just from my own journey, even if I don't feel like I've done very well at it. There are times I ran from pain in the past, times I just try to deny emotion, pretend like it wasn't there, and maybe I'm not the only one who struggles with those things. So Peter Scazzero, the author of Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, says awareness of yourself and your relationship with God are intricately related. He quotes Augustine, one of the most influential Christians in history, from his book Confessions in 400 AD. How can you draw close to God when you are far from your own self? Grant, Lord, that I may know myself, that I may know you. He quotes Meister Eckhart, a Dominican author who wrote in the 13th century, no one can know God who does not first know himself or herself. So the knowledge of the self is required, according to some of these spiritual giants, in order to know God. St. Teresa of Avila wrote in The Way of Perfection, almost all problems in the spiritual life stem from a lack of self-knowledge. These are big statements, right? And then Scazzero writes on page 66, the vast majority of us go to our graves without knowing who we are. We unconsciously live someone else's life. That cuts deep, right? Or at least someone else's expectations for us. This does violence to ourselves, our relationship with God, and ultimately to others. When I read that, I thought, is he overstating? Like the vast majority? Is it really that many of us feel like we don't really know who we are? We live according to other people's expectations. We could probably take an informal poll, but I immediately thought back to the countless conversations I've had with people about, feeling like they needed other people's approval and living up to other people's expectations and other people's dreams, right? And I think he might be right, that it actually is the vast majority of us who go through life without knowing who we are. Some of you here are more in touch with your emotions by virtue of your personality. It's just the way you're wired. And if that's you, kudos. And you can teach us a thing or two, because I think most of us feel this. We live somebody else's life, or at least we live with this constant din of other people's expectations. And they can drown out our own emotions and discourage us from being honest about how we're feeling and why. So first of all, if you're a note taker, if it's helpful to you to write some things down, feel free. We have the feels. We'll just start with what's obvious intellectually, but emotionally maybe not. We have the feels even if we aren't aware of them. And so Scazzero starts by saying, we have feelings and emotions even if we're not aware that we have them. There are people who say, I'm not emotional. Like, I'm not an emotional person. Is that true? No, it's not. That person is really saying, I don't express my emotions, which isn't really something you want to brag about, right? But it's when somebody says, I'm not an emotional person, it's simply not true. We all have an emotional life, just a colorful, constantly changing, deep, emotional life, whether we're aware of it or not. So I wrote part of this talk in Paradise Bakery the other night because they have bottomless coffee, which always sounds good until I leave with the caffeine shakes at 8 p.m., walking out the door like this. And so I sat at a high-top table like this, and it was hunched over my computer. That's how I type, just like that right there. And right across the aisle, there's a group of women having a Bible study. And you're right there. I could hear every word they're saying, whether I tried to or not. And they opened up with a verse from Matthew where Jesus says, love your enemies. And the leader said, oh, well, who has something they want to say about this? And so there's a pause, and then a lady spoke up, and she said, I know this lady, she's a friend of mine, and she can quote the Bible chapter and verse. She's in a church service every time the doors are open, and she's one of the most hateful, judgmental, nasty people I've ever met in my life. And she said, it's hard for me to love her. And so that launched a conversation that probably lasted for 20 minutes. How do you relate to people who are just really hard to get along with, and even if they're unaware of it? This poor lady probably doesn't know that she's the topic of conversation in Paradise Bakery right now. She probably goes through life unaware of her own emotion. Her religious fundamentalism is a form of self-medication, back to what we were talking about before, to help her pretend that she's perfect, has no struggles in life. She doesn't really feel these things. And she can just, kind of hide in Bible quotations and this mentality of it's her that's on the inside and everybody else is on the outside, and that causes her to distance herself and separate herself from other people. And so she's probably in pain and unaware of her own feelings. Just unaware, blind to what's going on, doesn't know where they're coming from, even if she would acknowledge them. A few weeks ago, I was walking in my office at my day job, the community center, and I walk past several offices to get to mine, and I realized, stopped dead in my tracks as I was walking, because I realized I was humming a song. I'm humming this song, and I stopped because I realized, oh my word, somebody that I work with might have just heard me humming that song, and they might know what song it is, and I realized I was humming a Taylor Swift song. And if you're a 39-year-old dude humming a Taylor Swift song, there are people who might, make certain, they may not think that's whatever. So and I think Taylor Swift is extremely talented and a great musician, actually. But just being a 39-year-old, delicate flower, fragile ego guy, I realize I'm humming a Taylor Swift song. And then I stopped and I walked back to my office and I thought, I heard that on the way here. That was on the radio on the way to work, and I heard that song, and without even realizing it, unconsciously, we know how this works, unconsciously, I just started humming this song, completely unaware. And in a little bit, we'll talk about our brains and why we can do this, why we can hear a song and just start humming it without conscious awareness. And the same is true in our emotional life. We can feel something very, very deeply to the point that other people can hear our emotion. They can see our emotion, but we can't. We're the only people who can't see our anger. We're the only people who can't see our grief. If we're going through life unaware of the feels that we have, our brains can do this to us. We can be unaware of it. Then Pete Scazzaro tells a story from his own life. Just one last illustration of this. His wife Jerry told him that she was going away for a month, I think it was, to her mom's house on the beach for July. And Pete had an instant reaction. A year and a half earlier, his wife Jerry had quit the church where he was a pastor. She was just sick of the burnout and the workaholism and the pretending. But she had come back to the church, but now going away for a month kind of triggered him. Gave him this instant emotional reaction before he could even be aware of what was happening. And you can't go away for a month and leave me here. And he was trying to keep her there with him instead of going away. And he also admitted that in time he realized that he wanted his wife Jerry to be the mother he never had. He didn't feel like his mother was around. And so by leaving him for a month, he was triggered somehow in deep mommy issues that I have. I know what those are like. And so he admitted that this emotion was there, and as soon as she said this, it just came up even before he knew it was happening. And then he had to do some digging to see where that emotion was coming from. He quotes a book entitled Cry of the Soul. Ignoring our emotions is turning our back on reality. Listening to our emotions ushers us into reality. And reality is where we meet God. Emotions are the language of the soul. And so when we ignore our emotions, we turn from reality and we turn towards the false self. And then Pete writes about what it looks like to turn toward the false self, living in unawareness of our emotions, not acknowledging them, not acknowledging who we really are and how we feel and why, we turn to reality, or turn away from reality, and we turn to the false self. To make this harder for some, especially in religious environments, my religious background taught me to deny my feelings, or at least to ignore them. And this, once again, is something that's just a feature of fundamentalist religion. Feelings are hard to control, and fundamentalism is about control. Feelings are seen as dangerous. Feelings are unpredictable. And fundamentalist religion likes to have things in nice little tight, predictable rows. Right? Feelings are complicated. And fundamentalist religion likes to keep things simple and understandable. It's a bumper sticker kind of theology. Feelings require acknowledging our humanity. Feelings are strangely human. And much of fundamentalism is an attempt to deny our humanity. To say, no, I don't struggle with those things. I'm not really like that. I've got it all together. It's all those other people who have feelings. It's really weird the way it works. And it's in shame-based religious circles, it can be hard that you have hard to admit that you have certain kinds of feelings too. And so your religious background might make it hard for you to openly acknowledge your feelings, regardless if that's you or not. Scazzaro says on page 72, when we ignore our feelings, we shut down our humanity. We cease to be fully human, at least to act on that. And we become some robotic, mechanical, kind of a shell. For some of us, that might describe how you feel. You feel like a walking suit, a walking set of clothes on a daily basis, like you can't acknowledge your emotions. So, if we're honest, that can turn into like its own private hell, where you feel alone, you feel meaningless, feel invisible, like you're not important, your feelings aren't important. We shut down our humanity. There are lots of reasons we can do that. We want to avoid pain, and so we ignore unpleasant emotion. Our feelings, we may have had this experience where our feelings were not valued by somebody we love. And so we just kind of stuff them. We pretend the feelings aren't there because we wanted that person's approval. And they didn't like our feelings. So we can be ashamed of the way we feel, and so we hide those feelings from others. We can think it's bad to feel that way. So we hide those feelings. And then he lists 3 big ways we turn towards the false self, and it can be hard to admit to yourself that you struggle with these, but maybe see if this will help. I struggle with all 3. And so it can be tough, but I struggle with all these. Temptations toward the false self. First, I am what I do. I find my identity in my performance. And so if you feel like a walking suit, perhaps you're just finding your identity in whatever you do for a living, instead of acknowledging emotions and what you really want out of life and your own humanity. When we first meet somebody new, what's one of the first questions we ask them? What do you do? Which is, what do you do for a living? What do you do for a job? That's one of the ways we evaluate people and label people. When we size them up and we compare ourselves to them based on what they do for a living. I participated in an event about a month ago in Chandler called the Most Connected City event. And it was a think tank for a whole morning with nonprofit leaders, business leaders, government leaders to talk about how to make Chandler the most connected city possible. It was really cool. And it was mostly breakout discussion groups, but the moderator gave instructions at the beginning of the day, and one of the things he said was, when you break into your discussion groups, just immediately start talking about the topic. I don't want you to introduce yourself, don't talk about what you do for a living, just start talking about the topic. And I was surprised when he said that. I felt this instant rush of like freedom and relief. We're going to skip the small talk. We're going to skip the stuff where we size each other up by what we do for a living. We're just going to skip all that, and we're just going to talk about the topic of the day. It felt good to skip that and just talk about what's important, because we do that so much in society. So it's this first temptation toward the false self is to ignore your emotion and just find your identity in what you do. I am what I do, performance. The second one is I am what I have, possessions. Finding my identity in my possessions. It's hard for us to admit we struggle with this. Why? Because we live in the suburbs, which means we all struggle with this. This is a feature of living in the burbs. Everybody in the Southeast, it doesn't grow a church talking about how it can be some of the underbelly features of living in the suburbs when you're in the burbs, right? But like in the burbs, life is about having a bigger house and the granite countertops and the stainless steel and more cars. That's partly why we live in the burbs. It can be hard to admit that. But everybody in the Southeast Valley struggles with number 2. I am what I have, being defined by my possessions. Some of us, we readily admit it. We realize it. Others, it's still hard. Let's pretend that we could take away your house and your car. And instead of going to your home today, you drove to a shack in a barrio in a 20-year-old beater and no more nice clothing. You had dirty jeans and torn up shirts, and that's what you would wear to work tomorrow. You would drive the beater from your barrio shack and your tattered clothes to work tomorrow. How do you feel? Do you feel less than somehow than you do now? We all find our identity here in the burbs, at least partly, by our possessions. And what if it's taken away, like a lot of people experience in the housing crisis? What do you have left now? If the job's gone and you're underwater in the house and you can't afford to do the things you used to be able to do, what's left? Money's such a fragile thing to put our identity in, but we do it anyway. Number 3, I am what others think. It's a temptation toward the false self, and this is finding my identity in popularity or approval. This is the approval addict. This is the person who wants to be popular and liked, and we're constantly thinking, what do other people think of me? Do they like me? Am I cool enough? Am I good looking enough? Am I interesting enough? Right? We're easily hurt and offended if we don't feel like people like us. We avoid any situation where we don't feel like people like us. We don't feel popular enough. It's just always there. Scazzaro writes that when Jesus was baptized in Matthew chapter 3, it's an answer, an antidote to all 3 of these temptations. When Jesus was baptized in Matthew chapter 3, everybody hears a voice from heaven. It says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." You remember the story if you've been around church for a while? It's the baptism of Jesus. And he points out that at this point, when Jesus was baptized, he hadn't done anything yet. There were no miracles. There was no teaching. He hadn't done any of those things yet. So his pleasing of God, his identity, wasn't based in performance because Jesus hadn't done anything yet. And he didn't have any money. So God wasn't pleased in the money that he had. He wasn't pleased in his performance, wasn't pleased in his possessions. And he wasn't popular yet, no crowds yet, no Sermon on the Mount crowds yet. Hadn't done any of that yet. But God was still pleased with him. No popularity. So without any of those temptations towards the false self, God, regardless of what you believe about voices from heaven, the narrator wants us to know God was pleased with Jesus before he had done any of these things or had any of these things. And our takeaway for that could be, what if you are a son or a daughter who was worthy of love? And that is the basis of your identity. Who are you? I'm somebody who is loved. Why? Because love. That's it. Doesn't have anything to do with money or popularity or your performance. But what if you really defined it? Meaning, if all those things were taken away, you'd still be okay. You wouldn't be thrown into an existential crisis. You would be all right. Can you imagine oh my gosh, the freedom? If you could lose those 3 things and you'd still be cool, you'd still be okay with that? Can you imagine that level of living, that level of being, if we were to find our identity in the fact that we're a loved son or daughter of God? I'm a loved person. Why? Because love. Not because of performance, not because of possessions, not because of popularity. I'm loved and I'm worthy just because love. I'm a son or a daughter, and I'm loved. How amazing would that be? And we wouldn't be so tempted to turn towards the false self. A pastor friend of mine says there's nothing you can do to make God love you anymore, and there's nothing you can do to make God love you any less. You're not in control of that. You're freed from being in control of that. You are loved. What if that were your identity? If I say, hey, who are you? And your answer was, I'm somebody who is loved, right? That would be a really interesting conversation over coffee, first of all, if you were to really answer it that way. But it would be true. If we could skip the niceties and the small talk and the gauntlet that we put each other through as we meet each other, I'm somebody who is loved. What if that were your identity? And the temptations toward the false self would lose their power. And then finally, how do we start this journey towards becoming our authentic selves? We connect the emotional dots. Scazzaro says we start by paying attention to the interior of our lives, by being mindful, paying attention to what's going on in my mind, my heart, however we want to put it. Did I start giving some time to thinking about how I feel and why? I'm not a robot. I'm not defined by my performance, possessions, popularity, but I start paying attention to how I feel and why. Once again, some religious people have a hard time with this. It's ironic because, for example, and you would find this throughout the Bible, but the book of Psalms, it's the longest book in the Bible. It's in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, 150 chapters. The book of Psalms is a book of song lyrics. It's poetry meant to be sung. Psalms means praises. It's worship music. And the book of Psalms very clearly, sometimes uncomfortably clearly, presents the full range of human emotions. The psalmists, the songwriters, are not afraid to acknowledge their emotion, to explore the range of their emotions, and to talk about them openly, sometimes really, really openly. And there are, just so many examples of this where the Psalms are just like a blueprint for how to express yourself. If you're not a religious person, the Psalms are still a blueprint for how to express your emotion, how to know it's there, and to name it, and to say it. The full range of emotions: anxiety, fear, doubt, despair, joy, anger, hope, fulfillment, peace, on and on. Some Psalms express joy, almost elation. Psalm 98, verse 4, check it out. Shout for joy to the Lord. All the earth burst into jubilant song with music. This person is so happy, they're like, sing it with me, everybody. You remember the scene from Jerry Maguire when he closes a deal and he's riding down the freeway and he finds Tom Petty's Free Fallin', and he just grabs the wheel and sings at the top of his lungs, free fall. This is Psalm 98. When you're at the top of the mountains, joy, elation, that's part of human emotion. Do you feel that at times? Do you feel that emotion in you? And do you know it's joy and elation? And do you know where it comes from? It's there somewhere. Even if you don't believe it, it's in there somewhere. The Psalms call it out. It's there in you somewhere. It's a part of who you are. Some Psalms are like the sad song you put on repeat after a breakup. And it just helps you grieve, right? Psalm 88, actually. Psalm 88 is like the Bible equivalent of a carton of ice cream and watching Dirty Dancing, right? Psalm 88, verses 3 through 5. I am overwhelmed with troubles, and my life draws near to death. I am counted among those who go down to the pit. I am like one without strength. I am set apart with the dead. This is sadness. This is depression. This is grief. Like the slain who lie in the grave, whom you remember no more, who are cut off from your care. That's a prayer to God, by the way. God, I feel God forsaken. I feel like I'm laying in a grave, forgotten, alone, and you don't even care. Nobody does. That's what that means. You ever felt like that? Sure. That's a part of the full range. That depth of despair is a part of the full range of human emotions. We prayed Psalm 23, a psalm of comfort. Psalm 23 is it's like a quiet confidence that it's all going to be okay. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. The old version, I shall not want, right, in the King James. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. Do you feel like people are alone? You feel like somebody might like to shoot you in this world? It bothers you deeply? I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Isn't that beautiful? It's an emotion of confidence and quiet resolve that we're going to make it. We're all going to make it. We can do this. Some Psalms express even brighter hope than that the future really can be better. The future will be better than the past. Psalm 25, in you, Lord my God, I put my trust. I trust in you. Don't let me be put to shame, nor let my enemies triumph over me. No one who hopes in you will ever be put to shame. But shame will come on those who are treacherous without cause. That's who loses. People who walk in the nightclubs with gunfire, that's who loses. People who use hate speech and play race games, they lose. Everybody with me on that? They lose. Do you believe that? And the way you win, show me your ways, Lord. Teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth and teach me, for you are God, my Savior, and my hope is in you all day long. Remember, Lord, your great mercy and love. Mercy and love win, for they are from old. Do not remember the sins of my youth and my rebellious ways. According to your love, remember me, for you, Lord, are good. Life is good, right? The Psalms express this full range of human emotion. On Friday, I saw a Facebook update about little Presley, the 6-month-old little girl in our church who's battling cancer. And there was this video that her moms, Liz and Lori, put on Facebook where her twin brother, Braxton, is sitting, just tore me up, sitting across from her in the hospital. And he hadn't seen her in a few weeks. And you twins, you know, the connection twins feel. And her little brother, Braxton, 6 months old, kind of leans over and gives her a little kiss, just looking at her. And I watched that video, and I had been thinking about the sermon. I thought, okay, I feel anger. I feel helpless. I feel deep grief watching that video. I also know that lots of people have been making meals and providing childcare and visiting and praying for them and sending good thoughts their way. And that makes me feel thankful. That makes me feel hopeful. And it gives me, even in pain, like way down deep in there somewhere, like a little sense of joy that goodness does exist in this world, even in pain, right? The full range of human emotions. Bono said recently, his criticism of a lot of contemporary Christian music is that it's not honest enough about life and the full range of human emotion. Not all, of course, but lots of, Christian music on the radio is happy clappy. And just people smiling all the time. There's a place for that. They're trying to express joy, that joy, even in pain. But then, lyrics like the Psalms are really honest about the full range. And he said maybe Christian music, all Christian music, could be honest about the full range of human emotions: heartache, sadness, disgust, despair, as well as joy and elation. Finally, several authors, cognitive therapists, wrote a book called The Mind in Therapy, Cognitive Science for Practice. Go buy that on Amazon after the service today, okay? That was way funnier in my head than it was out loud. I apologize for that. They're going to love it when I make this joke about the title. And they explain why our brains do this. And our brains are this neural network of memories, and the pathways associate those memories and emotions connected to them. It's this networked web of memories and emotion. And whenever we remember anything, so this happens every split second of our lives, what our brain does is it fires down these pathways and it finds something, a memory or an emotion, and it activates it. It's called activation, and it brings that to our conscious awareness. It can also activate it without our conscious awareness. So, 2 levels. We can be aware of what it's activating. We can be unaware of what it's activating. And so anytime we see anything, our brains instantly start associating it, and we can be aware of what we're feeling or unaware of what we're feeling that's activated by that stimulus that we encountered. Now, here's the cool thing: because the way our brains work by association, we can trace those pathways in our own minds. We can actually in our awareness, we can consciously trace back and find where those memories and their emotions are located. The different times in my life I've experienced things like this and felt that. And then that goes back to another time when I experienced this and felt that. And again, and again, and again. That's why therapy works the way it does. You can start talking about an emotion or a memory, and eventually your brain will start to fire through those networks, and it'll start to come out to your therapist. And your therapist will see that. And they can help connect the emotional dots, even if it's hard for you to do that. So the good news is your brain can retrieve emotion. It doesn't have to be a memory, or it doesn't have to be a mystery, I meant to say to you. It can retrieve where your emotion is coming from, if you're not aware of it. And you really can go back through your life and connect those dots. You can find thought, feeling, and behavior patterns in your life, and you can start to deal with them and get on the pathway to emotional health. And here's what that looks like. I've told this story before, but a lot of you are new, and you may not have heard it. When I was getting my master's degree, we were required to take counseling throughout the year. And I had an incredible experience with a counselor who was empathetic and just did a great job. And after a few sessions, I just had to admit to her, I was in my early 30s at the time, I don't really know how I feel. I don't really know. It's hard for me. I'm kind of numb. I don't really know. When you ask me how I feel, I'm not sure. And that's a really helpless feeling, like almost like an elementary feeling, like I should be able to do this, but I'm embarrassed because I can't. And she said, okay, well, let's try this. She said, as you go throughout your day, you're brushing your teeth, or you're stopped at a red light, or you're sending an email. I want you just to stop randomly throughout your day and ask yourself 2 questions. Number 1, how do I feel right now? And the second question is why? I'm going to wrap it up with this. And she handed me a piece of paper with a list of emotion words on it. I mean, talking about like feeling like going back to kindergarten, right? Like emotional kindergarten. Okay, here's a list of emotion words, and I want you to read through my list here. And as you go throughout your day, ask yourself how you feel, and it's going to be one of these words. And so find a word. She didn't talk to me this way, but that's how I felt. Find one of these words. Oh, right now I feel anger. Okay. And then that's how I feel disgust right now. And then go down through, and I want you to name how you feel, because that's hard for you. So name how you feel. There's a word on here. How do I feel? Oh, I think it's that one. And so, okay, you have a name now for that emotion. And then I want you to ask the second question, why do I feel this way? And she knew what these researchers know, that our brains, thankfully, have the ability to answer that question. Because of the neural network, we can go back. It's like losing your keys and then retracing your steps. You can trace back through and find, when have I felt this way before? What was happening? What activated that feeling? You know, and so it was incredible. I remember sitting in a red light one day. I remember the intersection. I remember where I was. And how do I feel right now? I feel angry. Yeah, that was a word on that list. Anger. Why do I feel that? What caused that? And it was, okay, well, what happened this morning that made me feel angry? Like, nothing really happened this morning that made me feel angry. So what happened? Was it last night? No, I can't think of anything last night. And I realized, when was it? And long time ago, I had this low-level anger in my life from things that happened a long time ago. And this isn't, you know how this works, right? This isn't a revelation. Things can happen early in our lives, and we just carry that for a long time. And that was just kind of like this constant buzz in the background of my life, this low-level hum of anger in my life. And that exercise, naming the feeling and asking why, where it came from, that helped me, through my brain pathways to get back to that. And I was like, the next week, I was like, I did it! I feel anger, right? I named an emotion, and it was like a breakthrough. Where, the rest of the year, it got way deeper and way more healing, because I was able now, and I am now, several years later, able to monitor. Oh, here's how I feel right now, and why. And trace that back, and it gets easier the more you do it. I'm not saying I've arrived, but I do a lot better than I used to. So you can, if you want to become your authentic self, you can resist temptations towards the false self. And just running from your emotions, saying, well, I'll be identified by what I do. I'll be a success. And if people think I'm a success, well, that's cool with me. And I'll just be a human doing, and I'll fool them, Or by what you have, status symbols. I drive a particular shape of metal down the freeway, therefore I'm cool. And, by our possessions or by our popularity, right? I don't want to do that. How about I'm a loved person? Let's start there. And then I can connect the dots and figure out how I feel and why I feel that way. And I can be on a pathway towards being who I really am and not faking it for other people for some reason. And that's the kind of spirituality that not only can lead to freedom and peace and joy and all kinds of good emotions on the list in our own lives, but it also, I'm convinced, makes our world better and makes occurrences like last night less common, when spiritual people are not driven by self-hatred and denial, but are driven by love and finding their identity as a loved person. All right, so may we experience the freedom and joy and elation and all the range of emotions as we become our authentic selves this week.